This quote beautifully encapsulates the importance of shadow work. But what does it really mean to honor and accept our shadow? What is the shadow self? How does it impact our lives? And most importantly, how can we integrate it into our conscious being? At just 11 years old, Johnson had a near-death experience. He was in a devastating car accident that left him teetering between life and death. During those moments, he described entering a golden world, a place of indescribable peace, beauty, and unity. For a brief moment, he transcended the boundaries of human experience and felt a connection to something divine. But when he was brought back to life, that golden world vanished. What replaced it was an overwhelming sense of loss. He felt disillusioned with life, unable to find meaning or joy in the mundane. This emotional weight, this profound disconnect from himself and the world, was the beginning of his shadow. Years of therapy and self-exploration taught him a profound lesson. The very consciousness that caused his suffering was also the key to his healing. Later, Johnson met Carl Jung, whose advice became a cornerstone of his life. Spend most of your time alone. Dedicate a space in your home solely for inner work. Trust the unconscious. It will protect you and guide you. Your task is not to achieve external success, but to contribute to the evolution of the collective unconscious. This story highlights a truth many of us face. Our shadow often originates from our deepest struggles, but it also holds the seeds of transformation. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow is central to understanding the human psyche. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we hide, suppress, or deny, often unconsciously. These are traits, emotions, or desires that society, family, or culture has labeled as unacceptable. For instance, imagine a child who is naturally loud and expressive. If they are constantly told to be quiet or stop being annoying, they may learn to suppress their natural exuberance. Over time, this repression creates a shadow, a hidden part of their personality that still exists, but is no longer consciously acknowledged. The shadow doesn't just form in childhood, it's a lifelong process. Anytime we feel ashamed, guilty, or unworthy, and we bury those feelings instead of addressing them, we're contributing to the shadow. However, the shadow isn't inherently bad. It's simply the unacknowledged side of ourselves. The problem arises when we ignore it, allowing it to fester and influence us in unconscious ways. There are several common misconceptions about the shadow that prevent people from engaging in shadow work. The shadow is evil. This is perhaps the most pervasive misconception. The shadow isn't evil, it's simply unexamined. While it may contain traits we consider negative, such as anger or jealousy, it also holds aspects of ourselves that are neutral or even positive, like creativity or passion. Shadow work is about fixing yourself. Shadow work isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. The goal is to integrate, not eliminate, the shadow. By accepting and understanding these hidden parts of ourselves, we become more authentic and balanced. You can escape your shadow. The shadow is an integral part of the psyche. Denying it doesn't make it go away. It just drives it deeper into the unconscious, where it gains more power. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Projection is one of the most fascinating and subtle ways in which the shadow manifests in our lives. You're watching a movie, and there's a character you just can't stand. Maybe they're arrogant, self-centered, or manipulative. As you sit there fuming, you might think, "I could never be like that person." But what if I told you that your strong emotional reaction isn't just about the character on screen? What if that reaction is revealing something about you? That's the essence of projection. We see in others what we cannot see or refuse to see in ourselves. Projection is a defense mechanism. It occurs when we unconsciously take the parts of ourselves we don't like, the parts we've suppressed into the shadow, and attribute them to someone else. This process helps us avoid the discomfort of facing our own flaws, insecurities, or desires. Carl Jung described projection as the shadow's way of getting out into the world. Rather than confronting these hidden traits directly, we externalize them, often in exaggerated or distorted ways. Projection isn't rare. It's something we all do, often without realizing it. The competitive colleague. Imagine you're at work and there's a colleague who always seems to be striving for recognition. You might find yourself thinking, they're so self-centered. Why do they need to be in the spotlight all the time? Now pause and reflect. Could it be that you too have a desire for recognition or success, but have been suppressing it? Perhaps you've been taught that ambition is selfish, so you've buried that part of yourself. The overly emotional friend. Maybe you have a friend who expresses their emotions freely, crying during movies, talking openly about their feelings. You might think, they're too sensitive. I'd never let myself be that vulnerable. But what if your discomfort with their vulnerability is a reflection of your own suppressed emotions? Could it be that you've learned to hide your feelings to appear strong, and seeing someone else express them triggers an unresolved part of you? The critical partner. In relationships, projection is especially common. Have you ever been irritated with a partner for being needy or lazy? It's possible that these judgments are projections of your own fears. Fear of being too dependent or guilt about wanting rest. Projection happens because the shadow is unconscious. We're not aware of these traits within ourselves, so when we see them in others, they stand out like a spotlight. Imagine carrying a backpack full of rocks. Each rock represents a suppressed part of yourself: anger, jealousy, insecurity, or ambition. You don't realize you're carrying this weight because it's hidden. But every time you see someone else carrying a similar rock, you feel triggered. You project your burden onto them, thinking it's their issue, not yours. Projection is the psyche's way of bringing the shadow to your attention. It's like a mirror, reflecting back what you need to see. When left unchecked, projection can cause significant harm to ourselves and to our relationships. Distorted perceptions of others. Projection can lead us to judge others unfairly. Instead of seeing people for who they truly are, we view them through the lens of our own shadow. This distorts our relationships and creates unnecessary conflict. For example, you might think your friend is too bossy, but in reality they're simply assertive. Your judgment might stem from your own discomfort with being assertive, which you've labeled as bad. Self-alienation. Projection distances us from our true selves. By externalizing our shadow, we lose the opportunity to integrate and grow. It's like constantly blaming a cracked mirror instead of realizing the crack is in your reflection. Perpetuating the cycle. When we project our shadow onto others, we're likely to encounter more situations that trigger us. The shadow doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. Instead, it keeps showing up in different forms, asking to be acknowledged. Here's the transformative part. Projection isn't just a problem, it's an opportunity. Every time you feel triggered by someone's behavior, it's a chance to learn about yourself. Think of it as a breadcrumb trail leading you back to your shadow. By examining your projections, you can uncover hidden parts of yourself and begin the process of integration. Let's explore practical steps to identify and work with projection. Notice strong emotional reactions. The first clue that you're projecting is a strong emotional reaction to someone else. If you find yourself feeling intense anger, annoyance, or envy, pause and ask, why does this bother me so much? What does this say about me? Identify patterns. Look for recurring themes in your projections. Are you often irritated by people who are overly confident? Do you frequently judge others for being lazy or emotional? These patterns can reveal your shadow traits. Own your shadow. Once you identify a projection, take responsibility for it. Instead of blaming others, acknowledge that this trait exists within you. For example, if you're annoyed by someone's arrogance, consider whether you suppress your own desire for self-expression. If you're triggered by someone's vulnerability, explore your own fear of being seen as weak. Practice compassion. Projection can make us overly critical of others. By recognizing that we're all human with our own shadows and struggles, we can approach others and ourselves with greater compassion. Seek integration. Integration is the ultimate goal. This means embracing the parts of yourself you've disowned and finding ways to express them healthily. If your shadow contains suppressed anger, learn to set boundaries. If it holds unexpressed creativity, give yourself permission to explore it. Here are a few examples of how recognizing and integrating projection can transform your life. Case 1. The ambitious professional. A manager constantly criticized their team for being lazy and unmotivated. After reflecting on their projection, they realized they had been suppressing their own need for rest out of fear of being seen as weak. By addressing this, they learned to set healthier boundaries and became more empathetic toward their team. Case 2. The emotional suppressor. A person who judged their friend for being too emotional discovered they had been suppressing their own grief. By acknowledging this, they allowed themselves to process their feelings and found deeper connections with others. The next time someone irritates or triggers you, take a moment to pause. Instead of reacting outwardly, turn inward and ask, "What is this revealing about me? What part of my shadow is asking to be acknowledged?" Remember, the more you embrace your shadow, the less it controls you. By owning your projections, you take a powerful step towards self-integration, authenticity, and wholeness. As Jung said, the best political, social, and spiritual work we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others. As intimidating as shadow work might sound, it's also incredibly rewarding. Jung and Johnson both emphasized that the shadow contains immense potential, what Johnson called the gold in the shadow. Hidden within the shadow are qualities we've suppressed because they didn't fit societal norms or expectations. For example, a person who suppresses their assertiveness might discover a newfound ability to stand up for themselves. Someone who denies their vulnerability might find that embracing it leads to deeper, more authentic relationships. The shadow is not a burden, it's a treasure chest waiting to be opened. By confronting it, we can uncover strengths, talents, and passions that have been buried for years. So, how can you begin to own your shadow self? Let's summarize. Acknowledge the shadow. Recognize that you have a shadow. Pay attention to your triggers, your projections, and the aspects of yourself that you avoid or deny. Engage in self-reflection. Practices like journaling, meditation, and therapy can help you explore the contents of your shadow. Ask yourself questions like, what am I suppressing? What triggers me in others? What qualities have I been taught to hide? Embrace, don't resist. Remember, the shadow is not your enemy. It's a part of you that longs to be understood and integrated. Treat it with curiosity and compassion. As Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Owning your shadow self is not about perfection, it's about authenticity. It's about embracing the light and the dark, the strengths and the flaws, to become a whole, integrated human being. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this message resonated with you, leave a comment below. Together, let's continue exploring the depths of our inner worlds.